Okay, we are recording. So we've talked about Bernie and Louise, our parents, and now you guys are next to talk about your lives. So mom and dad got married and lived in Provo and Edgemont, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what year would they have bought that place?
Well, I think Dad already owned it, but they got married in 65.
Okay. And it was 6 acres in the river bottoms of Provo with a house and some barns and corrals and an orchard and that kind of setup, right?
And horses, right?
Yeah, horses, the irrigation ditch. That was a
Yeah.
huge part of my childhood.
We had Scott Highland cows for a while. We had a stagecoach in the front yard that the neighbor owned.
What were the names of your Scotch Highland cows?
Longhorn Hippie Moo and Longhorn Shaggy Moo.
One was kind of the redheaded, and one was white.
Yeah, kind of a blondish, like a golden retriever color almost.
Yeah.
But I think one thing that we would do, the three of us especially, is we'd watch movies and then we try to act them out. Like Seven Alone was a movie about, so the family was going west on the Oregon Trail and the parents died, and then the big brother that was probably 12 to 14 had to take himself and his six younger siblings across the plains. So we'd go out in the cherry orchard and pretend like we were orphans and trying to get across the plains or something. And I don't know if we did, guys, did we do that in the summer? I remember doing that in the snow.
I definitely remember doing it in the snow.
Yeah. Snow.
And what I remember about that is it didn't matter how old he was in real life. Justin always had to be, how old, do you remember?
3, baby.
3. Yep.
I think my name was always Jeremiah if I could handle it, if I could make it work.
Yeah, that sounds right. So those were fun, and Sean and all were too little to do that, but we'd go out and trudge around in the snow in that cherry orchard. I don't know, it felt like for hours playing like we were orphans looking for a place to live.
But we would migrate over by the barns, and remember there was an old shed out kind of west behind Dad's shop, kind of where Perry had his boat, and there was an old sawmill saw.
Yeah.
We had a cherry orchard. If I remember right, there were 8 trees. Is that what you remember?
At least.
Yeah.
Didn't we all kind of claim a tree that we kind of thought was ours?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think there were probably more than 8. Some of them are still there.
Really?
Uh-huh. We
And
also
then,
had that Jonathan apple orchard, and we had some plums and pie cherries and red delicious apple tree as well.
yeah, I think the pie cherries, there were like 2.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, there was also the stagecoach. And somehow we had a hunk of fool's gold about this big. And after we saw Apple Dumpling Gang, we played that all the time in the stagecoach, especially since we had a chunk of gold.
And the stagecoach was the neighbors, and they just parked it there, right?
Yeah, he was gonna at some point fix it up and put it in the Freedom Festival parade for his business, which was like arts and frames or something, and he never did. So it just sat there and we just played in it all the time because he said we could. He didn't care if we played in it.
Yeah.
But didn't Dad have a bunch of horses, but you guys always just had to ride the crappy Shetland?
Um,
So he had, I mean, these guys can help me remember, but he grazed Morgans, and he had a stallion Pugno. He had a gelding Captain. He had his favorite mare Laurie, who had lots of colts for him. One point there was Xiao Mei. Who else?
he had one named Frosty that had really the mane was really white and blonde on Frosty.
Like
And
yours?
Frosty ended up in Sterling with our cousins. I know that Anita used to ride Frosty a lot.
Yeah. So yeah, we had that crappy Shetland named Shorty, and then Eve was a Welsh pony that was the worst horse in the world.
Yeah.
There was Glory B. I think there were 5 or 6 other Morgans.
And they'd kind of come and go, but he always had Punyo and Laurie. And did he ever ride Punyo?
I don't think so.
I don't think he did either, but we all rode Laurie. I grew up riding Laurie more than the other horses. She was the most cool, gentle mare, and we could just climb on her and ride her, and with just a halter. She almost never had a saddle, and she almost never had a bit.
I think she must have had 13 or 14 colts while he owned her.
Yeah. Well, and then Zingo was the last.
Zingo was the last one, and she had Zingo just before we sold the place. And he was a little colt, and we were learning how to lead him, and kind of, I felt like I was big enough to know something, which wasn't much. I was 8, but then we sold it. So he had, one of them died in his arms, basically, in a field. That was probably Xiao Mei. And he thought it was from worms. But
Which one took off down the icy lane and tore his shoulder?
I can't remember which one that was.
I don't
But
remember either.
Dad wore big buckle boots. He'd put his cowboy boots inside these rubber boots and buckle them, and he was going down a lane called Lover's Lane, and the horse bolted, and Dad was holding on, and he was kind of skiing behind it on his boots, and then he hit a dry patch, and it jerked him off his feet and messed up his shoulder. So he had a big old cast that feels like went from his neck to his waist, and his one arm was locked into it.
Yeah, and it probably went around the other arm like this. But yeah, that was a huge plaster cast. And when they cut it off, he kept at least half of it, and it was big enough I could use it for a doll cradle.
I remember playing with it, and it seems odd now.
Right.
And because of the way that it was, the only way he could really sleep was to lay on his stomach and leave his arm resting off the bed, like hanging down his hand was hanging down by the floor. And he slept like that for years after, a lot. He got used to that position.
I remember there was a time when I would be scared at night, so I would fall asleep in Mom and Dad's bed, and then they would move me. But in their room, he had ribbons everywhere from prizes he'd won for showing his horses. Lots of ribbons.
Yeah, and the weird thing is I don't ever remember him going to a horse show, but you're right, he did have all those ribbons.
He had friends that would come rope sometimes. They'd come use our fields or corrals and rope toy horses and whatnot. So we have some old family movies of that.
So did you guys feel like cowboys and cowgirls as kids, or not really?
I wanted to be, but I never felt like it. I didn't. I felt like Dad thought I was too young and in his way. So he didn't include me like I wanted him to.
One thing that was interesting was watching Dad be a cowboy. He did a lot of the work himself. He would shoe the horses, and I remember loving to watch him take care of their feet. And then we had a big round corral that was a pole corral, wood poles. And Willis and I would kind of lean up with our body and our face against the corral. And Dad had his big stallion in there, and he'd have a whip in the middle of the corral, and he'd run the horse in circles and turn him and run him circles. And so the horse would be running pretty fast. And as he'd get near where we were standing, he'd kick up manure. So we'd run away from the fence, from the corral, and then run back after he'd go past us. I remember standing there. I felt like we did that for a long time, watching that stallion do laps.
Well, one thing, and when I think about it now, it actually really, really surprises me because we moved when I was 12, barely 12. So I must have been 10 or 11. And he loaded Laurie up in his horse trailer, and he invited me and took me with him. And we went to someplace. We drove her to where there was a stallion and did the breeding or the mating or whatever the term would be. And he had me watch that. And looking back, that seems weird. And he never said anything, and he didn't try to explain it. He just took me and had me there with him while he did it.
That sounds like a great segue to Willis's lessons experience. Willis?
Well, I had certainly watched animals mate. And I would have been almost 12. And we were in Idaho, in Jamestown, and we were breeding our rabbits. Lisa and Justin and I each had a bunny. And Justin's was the male, and mine was black. And his was white, and they were mating, and we're watching them mate, and we know what's going on. And Dad comes over, and he's watching us watch, and he grabs a piece of wood on the ground and his stubby pencil out of his pocket protector and starts drawing flowers and trying to explain pistils and stamens and fertilization. And we were so freaking confused, and it felt like biology homework from school. I mean, I'd heard of pistils and stamens too, but and then I figured out in my own brain, like, oh, he's trying to explain mating. And I'm like, we're watching rabbits, at least talk about that, the biology that they have, because we're watching it. But it was just so awkward for him that
Oh, poor Dad.
he thought he better tell us, but he didn't. He wanted to remove it from anything
We should have
uncomfortable or inappropriate.
we should have Justin tell the story of Dad trying to cure him of wetting his pants.
Yeah, we shouldn't. So, I don't know how old I was, but
Probably 3.
well, I remember finishing the children's parade in Provo, which was an annual thing, and just peed my pants all over, just being embarrassed to walk the last part of the parade with, it's obvious what had happened. And anyway, I kept struggling. And one day, I was outside with Dad, and he had what he called a horse trough, and it was basically a big round metal capsule with a big part cut out of the top, and they'd put water in there so the horses could drink out of it.
I'm quite sure that it was an old wash tub
Okay.
for doing laundry.
Oh,
But
okay.
anyway, yeah, it was a big horse trough.
Watering trough. So anyway, Dad had enough of me wetting my pants, so he discovered that I'd had another accident, and he just picked me up and dropped me right into that cold water. And I remember feeling that he loved me afterwards. I knew he did it lovingly. I'm not sure that cured me, but it wasn't long after that I was cured.
Well, I've heard Dad told me that story a few times, and he was two times he told me that he was laughing his head off, saying how amazing you were at fighting. He said
Oh.
that you get all four limbs on the rim, and he'd try to pry them off, and like try to shove you in. Another limb would stick out and grab it. He said you're like a cat from a cartoon or something. He had to just keep fighting to finally dunk you in. He said that you were really strong.
Well, I don't remember the fight part of it, but I'm not surprised I was resisting going in that dang cold water.
Yeah, there's just a
I
pump there.
was watching it, thinking it was kind of traumatic, just like, and you know, he didn't want to give up because he wanted to prove his point, but Justin fought so hard. I think part of him wished he wasn't doing it. But part of the frustration for him is we're just outside. There were no neighbors within wherever. So anytime you got to go to the bathroom, you just do it. So that's what really frustrated him. Like, you know, there's a tree right there. Why do you wet your pants?
Wow. Shoot.
Do you guys have any stories off the top of your head about your childhood friends in Edgemont? Over the years, I hear you guys joke and talk about some of your friends that kind of seem like characters.
Well, so the Chapmans had kids pretty close to our ages. Caroline was like a year younger than me. And was Robert your age, Willis?
Justin's.
He's mine.
Justin's? Okay. And then they had some other littler kids, but we played with them quite a bit. And then Katie Faulkner was a year younger than me, and Lance was whose age?
In between me and Willis.
Yeah.
Okay. So
the Chapmans were east of us, and they supposedly couldn't get a permit to build a house from the city. So they submitted plans and built a barn. And it felt like they were always building it, and it was huge. And while we were there, it wasn't finished. They lived in it, but it had a lot of finish work to do. But we would go from our house through the field west to their house, and for a time there was a calf that was housed in that field. And
little bull, right?
Probably, yeah. And I remember sitting by the fence waiting for a moment when it was far enough away to calculate and decide if we would dare to run to get from our side through that, over the gate or through the fence to their side. And it was traumatic. Like it was a race for your life to go between our place and theirs.
Because you were scared kids, or would it actually charge you?
I don't think it ever got anybody, but it certainly charged, at least at some point.
Probably
Because
out of
all of us and all of the Chapmans, we were always, you know, it was like some Sandlot thing.
Yeah, I'm sure it didn't have bad intent, but it sure seemed overwhelming and scary.
Remember the little pond where we could ice skate between us and Chapman's?
Yep.
yeah.
I mean, I don't ever remember being in ice skates, but I remember in my snow boots skating around on the ice, thinking I was skating.
And there was a little stream that fed it or either left from it. It was about this wide and maybe, I don't know, 1.5 feet, 2 feet deep. And we'd catch water skeeters in that all the time.
It was pretty idyllic of a place to grow up for kids that wanted to be outside. on one edge of our property, there was a hill that went across Lover's Lane, which was the road, and there was a hill that went up on top to a big knoll, and there was a little like tunnel of trees you could crawl under and then crawl up through the trees. It was almost an overhang, and sometimes it seemed dark and scary, like there was kidnappers in there, and sometimes it seemed like a perfect adventure for kids that were playing like they were pioneers to go play in. And
Yeah.
with all of our trees and space, and it's great.
Well, and then the irrigation canal was really fun. And I don't even know where we had like some big plank of a board that had
It was a sheet of plywood.
yeah, and it had a rope on it that somebody had drilled a hole and shoved a rope through it and tied a knot, so you could drag it, and we'd hold the knot and go stand on the end, and then the current would push the board up like this, and we'd call it growing, or let's grow it, and then we'd run over, and like with the momentum of the current and us, it would push us a little faster than the current, and we'd go around the loop and then drag it back through the pasture that had thistles all over, which was not fun because we were usually barefoot. But that was always a fun thing to play.
Yeah, it was fun to make it come up, and then you even it out, and it would float and go downstream and then eventually sink. And we'd raise the front up again and float and then eventually sink. So it's good.
So my first friend that I ever remember was Lance Faulkner, and they were there before the Chapmans moved in, and they're the ones who own Will's Pit Stop. Well, we're always dressing up as girls, and Justin and I and Lance Faulkner dressed up, and we were all had wigs and girls' shoes and Lisa's old dresses and everything, and we're on our swing set, swinging and playing, and Lance's older brother Bill came over, and I don't remember if he was dropping off something or came to get Lance, but he thought we were Lisa and her friends, and they got a real kick out of it. Lance, I don't know, 20 years ago something, died in a boating accident, but at his funeral his mom had a picture of the three of us dressed up, and
That's
she
cool.
still was getting a hoot out of that.
Yeah, so that was the precursor to us dressing you up, Tim.
Yeah.
Well, and I think we called you Wilhelmina and Justina when you were dressed up. I don't remember what we called Lance. Probably Lancina, even though it's not really a name. But I think one of my favorite memories, and this probably happened after we would be out in the orchard playing in the snow, is we'd come in and we had a fireplace in the same room as the TV. And so they faced each other. The fireplace and the TV faced each other, and then the room was in between, and Mom and Dad would always have a fire, and we'd come in and warm up in front of the fire and watch Wonderful World of Disney on Sunday nights. Dad wasn't a huge, yeah, with popcorn. Dad wasn't a huge fan of us watching a lot of TV, but Sunday nights he'd watch Mutual of Omaha, and we could watch too, but I don't think I was ever super interested in that. And then we'd watch Wonderful World of Disney. And in the summer, we'd have the popcorn, obviously not the fire, but Mom would make what she called Kickapoo Joy Juice. So basically it would be like a peach smoothie. So when peaches were in season, we'd have Kickapoo Joy Juice and popcorn and watch Disney.
When did beans as a Sunday staple start? Your whole life?
Jamestown.
No, yeah, in Idaho. When we were kids in Edgemont, we had a full dinner on Sundays with like roast, potatoes, gravy. I mean,
Jello.
like a legit big meal.
For reals?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we usually had guests. A lot of times Brother Mariotti and
Usually just him.
So you moved to Idaho in what, late 70s?
78.
When?
Yeah, 78, right in August, right like the day before school started.
Like late night the day before school started.
So Lisa, you were like 12, and Willis, did you say you were 10?
Uh-huh.
And Justin, you were 9?
Almost.
So why did the potatoes and roast stop and the bean burritos start?
Mom told
You
me
know-
tonight that she hadn't discovered burrito skins before that.
Well, part of it is when we were in.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
no, you
When we were in Provo and we had those Scotch Highland cows, and they were both female, and Dad would go get them bred, and then they'd have calves, and then he'd butcher it, and a lot of times he did it himself, and then there was some meat processing place he'd send it to. So we were growing our own. Growing's maybe not the right word, but that's when they bought that great big freezer and filled it full of all of the beef. So it was basically like free meat, and then we just ate through it, and then the next year we'd do it again.
I think Wilga, maybe you can explain a little bit about the characteristics of the house we lived in, what that was like. What it ended up looking like
in Edgemont.
in Edgemont.
And it was an old farmhouse, and an interesting thing is it technically had like 5 entrances. So if you came in the front door, there was a porch, like a covered porch, and then you would go right into the house, where we would always go in as into like kind of the front room. But the side of that porch, there was a door that went into another room that Dad made his art room later, but we never used that door. And then that room on the south had a door that went outside that we never used. So there were those kind of 2 living rooms, and then you would go into the kitchen. There was a bathroom in the hall, and then the kitchen, and the kitchen had a door to outside.
That we did use.
Yeah. And above the bathroom, there was a big storage thing, like a big loft. And when Dad was on some trip to Canada, Mom built a ladder and had us paint it and nailed it onto the wall. And we went up and created a playroom, put carpet, we had colored light bulbs, made it a really cool, fun place for kids that Dad was never in support of. And then their bedroom was next to that bathroom. And then it was almost like an addition to the house, maybe, but on the north side, you'd go in and there were 2 bedrooms, one on either side, and then kind of a hallway where there was laundry, and then another door that went outside. But from the outside on the back side of the house, below Mom and Dad's room, there was kind of a cellar. And then when you first went into the house, the covered porch, there was a door that went down some big, steep cement stairs where there was a cellar there too. And there was storage and kind of almost a shop area. And then there was all the room that the home had originally been a coal warmed. So there was a big coal furnace, and you could dump all the coal in. And we used coal.
When I was really little, we used coal. And when I was really little, that area that you were saying was the storage area, that's where Mom did laundry, and she had an old wringer washer.
Oh, that's right.
For a few years, and then they got an electric washer and dryer and put them in that back hall by the bedrooms.
What
But
do you mean?
you could go ahead.
What do you mean a wringer washer?
So it was 2 or 3 tubs. So there was a big tub that had an agitator. It was open on top, and it would go like this, and you'd put the soap in the hot water, and there was a hot water faucet down there, and you'd put the clothes in, and it was open on the top, and they just slosh back and forth, and it'd stop after a while, and then there was a thing on a pivot. It had 2 rollers like this, and you'd feed the clothes through it, and they'd roll, but they were really tight, and it would squeeze all the water out, and it'd go into a tub of clear water, and then you just kind of stir it around in there. It was just a big tub. It didn't have any kind of agitator or electronic or mechanics on it. So you'd wash it in that, and then you'd pivot the rigger thing and put it in another tub to you kind of had your first rinse and your second rinse, and then you'd squeeze the water out in those things between every cycle, and then the last one you'd roll them through and put them in a basket and then go hang them on the line. Now, if you go to the hot baths at Lava Hot Springs, and it's been, I don't know, 7 or so years since I was there, but they had one of those that was a hand crank one that you can kind of squeeze the water out of your swimsuit before you take it home. So
what,
where you've seen one.
what powered the agitator? Was it electric?
Yeah, there was some kind of electric power to that. And I think her wringer actually was electric too, and she had an old broomstick that she'd kind of push the clothes through. So, because if you caught your fingers in it, you could do some serious damage, and if you caught the broomstick in it, it'd go in and jam and it would stop, but it wouldn't really cause damage. So,
And so the trough Dad tried to stick Justin in, or stuck him in when he wet his pants, was one of those big basins for that kind of washing.
I don't think it was one of the ones that Mom had with her washer.
I think you're right, but it's what it was.
So what I remember most about the house was how it ended up looking from the outside. That's a whole crazy, interesting story to me.
Well, it got to the point where Dad had his friend Bill White come over and put electric baseboard heaters in all the house to try to more efficiently heat the house. But it was such an old house and wasn't insulated very well. He had his nephews, the Souths, come and spray urethane foam all over the house. So they would spray on this urethane, and then it expands, and there was probably 4 to 6 inches thick of this yellow foam that once it dried kind of turned to a dark orange, looked like gingerbread. And then they sprayed a 1/8-inch thing called pyrocrete that was white over the top to protect it and make it fireproof. So it looked like frosting on gingerbread on this old, I don't know, 20s farmhouse. And it looked ugly. It started to look ugly, and we were embarrassed as kids.
Well, the
little pieces of the white stuff would fall off, and you'd see the orange underneath it.
And the orange kind of oxidized, and the texture was weird. And then it would run with, I don't know what made it, maybe the roof, the shingles on the roof or something. So it had black runny streaks over it and stuff. But and part of the reason too that Dad had switched out the heating is because the coal bothered him, and he had some allergies, and he'd say it made him feel like a pumpkin, like his head was a pumpkin.
We had a yard in the front of the house with a few little trees. We had a swing set, and we played outside all the time. And we had irrigation ditches that went, cement ditches on at least two sides of that property. And we played in the dirt. Like somehow our mom and dad would not turn out water onto the front yard on the lawn very often. And we just wore it to dirt, which just baffles me that we didn't.
Well, we never had a lawn. If it was green, it was weeds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like why on earth didn't we take a few minutes and figure out how to get some grass in our yard? It was pretty ghetto.
And we owned the water rights. We could have.
Yeah, and
we had
didn't
our
have them
we had
very-
our turn.
Yeah, I don't remember their water being in it. I mean, it wasn't very often. We wouldn't pull it through there very often, but yeah, we did have water rights to do that.
But Dad could have done it weekly if he wanted to, if not multiple times. He used to go work on the ditch between Mariotti's and our house, which fed that
Yeah.
from the Provo River.
We had two favorite pastimes in that front yard. One is we had an old wooden spool that would have had at one point something industrial on it. And we would put it on its side and step on it and walk on it and roll it around the yard. Or we'd fill up empty gallon jugs of milk full of water and build walls with them and then run into them on our trikes. We had big like metal trikes, the three-wheelers, and we'd go across the lawn as fast as we could and crash into these walls of water bottles.
So the first time we did that, we thought it would be like something in the movies where you hit it and it just like water everywhere, and didn't realize that water jugs full of water was going to be like hitting a brick wall. And I don't remember who took that first run, but they were just like, "Pud," and we never had water spray everywhere. But Ed Young was with us one time that we tried that.
We also had an old metal kind of a spool or some kind of a axle, two
Oh yeah,
wheels with spokes and a
like a hand
axle
cart.
between. Yeah, that we would push around. It was old rusted. We'd push that around and play on it.
We had so much junk. There was also an old kind of a between the house and the barn behind Dad's shop. There was like Willis had mentioned Perry's boat, but there was also an old like manure spreader, some old farm thing that was rusty and gross and falling apart, and we'd play on that. And I remember there was a kid at school that bullied me, and his name was Jess Ivy. And he was littler than me, but he was mean, and I was kind of scared of him. So when we got a new brother and Mom and Dad announced they were naming him Jess, I was so mad because I didn't like this kid at school. And I remember sitting out on that manure spreader. I think that's such a stupid name. I'd rather name him, and I was going on and on. I don't remember all these, but like I'd rather name him Godzilla than Jess. That's such a stupid name because this kid picked on me. But I got over it.
Well, and Sean used to call that house the Yuggly house.
Yeah.
As a kid?
Yeah.
Yeah. We
Yeah,
couldn't say ugly.
Say ugly. He was too little to say ugly.
And Dad had a pickup truck always, and he had a camper shell for it. So in that phase of our lives, we traveled a lot.
Well, we had a real camper. Like a camper with a sink and a bathroom and a kitchen.
But the one on the back of the truck, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That had nest in the back of the truck.
Yeah. So I don't remember hardly any details from traveling, but I know that they put a lot of miles with that. And we can't get away from this phase of life without talking about. Mom decided she wanted to keep the kids in the back of the truck without them falling out. So a back of a pickup truck used to have some holes in the bed where you could, on the kind of the rim of the bed, and she put sticks in those holes and then somehow attached chicken wire to it. I don't know how we got in or out, but I remember driving down University Avenue in Provo in the back of a pickup truck surrounded by chicken wire so it wouldn't fall out.
I remember driving.
We drove to Lava and back.
Yeah, forget University Avenue.
In the back of a pickup truck.
So that was with no shell.
Right.
Yeah, just the pickup
Open air.
with sticks.
It was just a wire. It was just a wire cage.
Yeah.
That must have been a long drive, huh?
I'm sure we loved it, and I don't think Dad loved the idea at all. When he found out, he wanted that thing taken out.
Oh, my children transported like livestock. Yeah.
Well, one of the best memories I ever had was taking a church history trip to Nauvoo and back in the back of Ken and Jim's livestock trailer with my siblings and cousins.
Yep.
It was awesome. We had to sit around and be in seatbelts and listen to the boring grown-ups. We just got to run around. It was sweet.
Yeah.
So, should we talk about Cool Snubs' horsewhip real quick?
Yeah.
Who has that?
So,
now?
funny thing, Dad would always say, or he said to me 5 or 6 times in my life, he said, your mother would get mad and want to spank you, and he'd imitate her how she'd spank, and she wasn't able to swing her arm. She never hit hard at all. But when she got mad, she certainly put the fear of God in me, because she'd grit her teeth and grumble, but she had this little riding quirt that was probably 4 feet long, maybe 3.5, and it was her horsewhip, and she always threatened it, and she got it a few times and tapped me with it, but I was never hit with it ever that it hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah,
She
so
had the,
this is what about this big around. I don't know if you can tell. About that big around, and kind of like braided together, and then at the end there was a little fork on it probably about as long as my fingers, and she I don't remember her doing much about it, but she'd threaten it.
well,
I'm gonna get out my horsewhip.
when she'd willed it and she was angry, you didn't want to get whipped, so you did what you had to do to not get whipped.
Yeah.
Right. Her anger was enough.
Yeah. So I was on a ride once with Mom down Lover's Lane on our Welch pony Eve, and Mom was tough, right? She grew up on horses, and I had a ton of respect for her in that type of environment. We got down the lane and the horse started to act up and spin circles and would not keep going. And we couldn't figure out why. And so Mom got me off and she said, you give me that strap. And there was a leather strap somehow laying in the middle of the dirt road. And she took that strap, and I'm telling you, I was freaked out as I watched her give it to that horse until she got the horse to go where she wanted it. And then we discovered there was a dead dog on the side of the road that stunk. And of course the horse was scared of it, but we got where we wanted to go.
That horse was crazy. So as we'd go down Lover's Lane, or go south on Lover's Lane, and then you'd cross the main road, and it's in a different place now, and then go into another part of Lover's Lane, and we'd be by the actual road, and because nobody used really Lover's Lane, it was kind of just our big long driveway, but there would be cars and trucks and loud motorcycles down that road, and the horse would just be like, yeah, okay, no big deal. And then down further on Lover's Lane there was a pasture with some cows, and the first time she saw the cow, she freaked out and bucked and reared and acted like it was the most scary, terrible thing she'd ever seen. She was insane. That was the worst horse we ever had.
Yeah.
Well, you guys have
So,
any other main
well,
memories?
we kids would want to come down to the river bottoms because you could fish in that canal that ran through our property. And I remember seeing kids from school, but we were the only, we had to walk up the hill to go to Edgemont, and right kind of on the hillside where the Edgemont Pharmacy is was an old schoolhouse that was no longer used, and it was, we occasionally would go through that way to home, but it was haunted and we were scared of it. And there were a couple of mounds of dirt that were supposedly where they'd buried the principal, and just all the things you could think of to make it more scary and eerie. But the kids at Edgemont, especially up in Indian Hills, were really snobby about people who lived in the river bottoms. Like, we were called the river bottom rats, and I felt ashamed of living in the river bottoms when kids from school would venture down to the river bottoms to go check out the river. And
Plumbing
at
it.
one time Lisa's friends were down there, and she had a good friend, Stephanie Miller, who loved horses and had horses too, but she was always wanting to come down and see our horses. And I got a fishing rod and reel for my birthday, and Justin and I were down there fishing, and somehow Jenny Miller and Stephanie Miller and Lisa were down there, and I can't remember what happened, but Stephanie Miller got a hold of my fishing pole and broke the reel somehow, and we were just being like kids, and we were walking back Lover's Lane to our house and arguing and having a verbal fight, and Justin picked up a rock and threw it and hit her in the head. Do you remember that? I think you cut Stephanie Miller's head.
Yeah, I think you're right.
That was scary when I made contact, and she had a big egg, and a goose egg, and she's bleeding. I think she came running into the house like she was gonna die, didn't she?
Probably.
Probably.
We all probably thought she was gonna die.
But Justin was always a good shot at throwing anything, so I wasn't gonna hit her, but I wasn't surprised he did.
Well,
Even though I know you certainly didn't think you're gonna crack her head open. So it was funny in high school when you were dating Jenny Miller. I'd always think, oh yeah, remember when you cut her sister's head?
with a rock. Well, I don't know if you guys remember this. You might have been too little, but it must have been a rainy year, and that hill where Perry's lived, a big chunk of that hill slid down over Lover's Lane.
Mm-hmm.
There was a back end, so we could still get to the house, but there was a while before they cleared that out. And so it was just this big mudslide that was, I don't know, covered the road, and it was probably 5 or 6 feet wide. I don't remember because I was just little. And I would just go out there and just wallow in the mud, and it was fun. But I don't know how Mom put up with that. But
Speaking of throwing things, I got Lisa mad at me one day in our front room. And she threw a doll. I think she picked it up by the leg or the arm, and she chucked a big doll at me, and I ducked on the couch, and it broke our front window.
Yep, and I got in trouble, and then I was even more mad because it's like, you jerk, you ducked, and now I have to pay for the window. So yeah, it was this soft body, but it had these plastic arms and legs and head, and I just, yeah.
I remember watching General Conference, and I remember President Kimball being the prophet. I remember him talking about food storage and thinking, oh, we got to be ready. And then somehow one of those summers there was a drought. So Dad was super conscientious. We couldn't use any water. And so I was always kind of on my mind, afraid of, oh no, we're going to not have food and water. And then we would do these earthquake drills at school where you had to crawl into your desk and whatever. But we would take field trips to the bomb shelter below Edgemont Elementary, and they'd show you the crackers you had to live on when the Russians bombed us.
I don't remember that at all.
Looking back, I was so like, why are they scaring the heck out of little kids about? I was so afraid we're gonna get bombed someday. We're gonna have to eat saltine crackers below the school. You don't ever remember going to that bomb shelter?
I
Do you?
no, I
Esty?
remember
Oh.
But probably
That was this-
probably can't leave our memories of Edgemont without talking to. We had those plastic molded toboggans, and somehow we figured out how to fill one with snow, bring it into the floor of the kitchen, and dump I don't know what ingredients into it to try to make ice cream. So sugar and some flavor. And
I had a recipe from my 4th grade Pioneer Unit cookbook, and yeah, it was probably eggs and sugar and vanilla extract.
and we would make it with a bowl of snow till one day we brought in 5 gallons of snow in a toboggan.
Faulkners.
I think we even poured milk in it, didn't we? And we're all on the kitchen floor eating out of it like a trough.
it was a big trough with a bunch of funny little kids sitting around laughing their guts out eating it.
But even Snubby was kind of disgusted at how hillbilly it was.
Yeah. Crazy.
Oh, let's see. So yesterday was Halloween, and that reminds me, when we were kids, we had store-bought costumes, and they were probably just like plastic drapey things with like a big straight thing with a print on it and a hole for your arm and a hole for your, holes for your arm, and then plastic molded masks. And if you try, and they had a little slit in the tongue and little things for the eyes, and if you tried to stick your tongue through it, it'd cut the heck out of your tongue. But I had a green witch with a wart. And what, Justin, was yours a skeleton with a
knife through it?
I don't remember what Willis's was, but
Oh,
we
the
tried to
teddy
go.
bear.
Anyway, we'd try to go trick-or-treating, and Maisie would freak out, and we weren't allowed.
She came over to our house, and we had to take our masks off.
Well, and I remember wearing that for at least 2 years and going to her house and having to wait out under the carport while Mom talked to her because we had the masks and she didn't want them near us.
Especially Justin.
Yeah.
Well, for reference, Maisie was Mom's friend from Taiwan who was a neighbor.
So you said the river bottoms were kind of looked down on back then. The 6 acres you owned then, what do you think it's worth now?
Millions.
I don't know how many houses are on those 6 acres, but there's a lot of really nice houses.
They sold in 78 for 150,000. Is that right? Like 25,000 an acre.
Sounds right.
But I think Dad bought the whole thing for 26. But in 80, you'd have to ask Mom. What do you remember? In 80, I don't think you could buy a quarter lot for 25,000.
Yeah.
So whoever Dad sold it to turned around and made 10 times off of it in 2 years.
Yep.
But,
At least.
Well, we've mentioned Mariotti a couple of times, so I want to talk a little bit more about him. He was this old guy that lived down and around the bend on Lover's Lane to the north of us. And he was just this old, he was like 90 something and widowed and deaf, mostly deaf. And when the school would do the Thanksgiving fundraiser for the indigent, he was always on the list. And we had him over almost every Sunday, and he walked with a cane, and he was really old and kind of decrepit. And now he was in his 80s or late 80s or something when I was born, and he told Mom something. Oh, that's a pretty little girl. I ought to marry her. And of course, just kidding around, because he was old enough to be my great-great-grandpa. And Mom said, well, when she's 16, you can marry her, thinking he wouldn't live till I was 4. And so here I am, like 10 and 11 years old, and he's like, oh, I'm going to marry you when you're 16. And I was so freaked out. I thought I was going to have to marry this old, smelly man. And you'd go to his house, and he didn't even have dishes. He'd be eating, or he might have, but I don't remember that he did.
He had some.
But he'd be heating up soup on his stove in the can and then eat it out of the can. I remember him doing that and just being so freaked out that I was going to have to marry this crusty old weird guy.
So is his last name Mariotti or his first name?
Yes, his first name was Omero. So his name was Omero Mariotti. He lived right where Walden is now. And his property had 3 houses on it, but 2 of them were like old and burned out. And so he kind of lived in a shack.
Yeah.
And Mom would cook too many pancakes like on a Saturday morning, and we'd put them in a bread bag and ride our bikes down to his house and give him pancakes. And I mean, the whole area just smelled, because he burnt, I think his heat was probably wood, but at least one of those homes had been burnt, like, so it was charred, and the whole area just smelled like, burnt, charred. And he was a really nice guy. He'd always give us some little weird candy, but
Out of his pocket that was fuzzy and linty.
Was he like German or something? Do you have an accent?
no.
I don't remember an accent. He would have been Italian, of Italian descent.
His son and his son's wife lived on 700 South. So once we moved back to Provo, like the whole time we lived there were Mariottis in our ward there. Gloria and Sam.
Yeah, I think he died when I was probably about 14. And looking back, maybe I should have married him and had the property that he owned and own Walden now.
Maybe.
But it freaked me out when I was a kid. So another really cool memory, there's a couple, and they were around Christmas, and I don't think they were the same Christmas, but there was one year when Dennis Chapman, who was the father of the Chapman family, was the caretaker of Aspen Grove, and they lived up there in the off season. So we went up there on school break for a couple days to stay with them, and in the little family cabins at Aspen Grove. And there were trails that were plowed or shoveled or whatever. And so we could walk around and check the properties, but we'd go off the trails and hike and try to adventure. It was like hip deep. And then
at least we had never seen snow that deep ourselves.
Yeah. And then he was trying to bring us back home for Christmas down the canyon, and it started snowing, and that was a scary, scary ride. Like
Yeah.
Christmas. It might have been the
I
20th.
think it was Christmas Eve.
I think it was Christmas Eve.
I think it was.
So, and then there was the Christmas that Santa went crazy and got us so much stuff and hid it all over the property.
That's right.
You guys probably had more experience with that than I did.
Remember we
What
had
I remember,
to do a chore and feed some animals in the place where the grain was or something. We found a soccer ball.
yeah.
Yeah, it was like, hey, go feed the animals. And we're like, we want to play with our toys. We don't want to go out there. And Dad sent them out there, and there was a soccer ball.
Snubby would wait till BYU students went home for the holidays, and then we'd go find a Christmas tree in some dumpster.
It's true.
So we'd get our Christmas tree super late. She'd drive around Provo looking for some used tree that students had that tossed. Some
And were
Charlie
they decorated?
Brown.
What, Tim?
And did you get them decorated?
So we'd go home and decorate them, but they were just some Charlie Brown little. So I remember one year getting one, put it up on a card table because it was so little. Well, this house had 11-foot ceilings, big old ceilings in the house.
Do you
So Mom got some 5-foot tree,
do you
carving
remember?
pumpkins.
Yes. So we took the pumpkin guts and like lobbed them and tried to hit the ceiling.
Well, somehow we carved our pumpkins, and I grabbed some and hucked it, and it stuck on the ceiling. So then we were all trying to huck it and get it to stick on, and Mom got mad and
And
made
the
us
one
stop it. As long as we lived there, I think the first thing I threw stayed there, didn't it?
Yeah. So like 2 years later, there's this little chunk of like brown pumpkin, crusted pumpkin guts up there.
It was a
I
high
don't know why they
ceiling.
didn't get a ladder and a broom.
I don't know. Oh boy. Well,
Well, are we running long? We could easily do this again. I'm concerned about having something that's too long for people to want to watch.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
cut it. I'll pause it. I'm gonna
let me
stop the
with one
recording right now.
Let me wind up with one thing and then we'll stop. A few years back, Kimberly said to me, she was probably about 15, so probably 10 years ago or so. She said, if I could live anywhere I wanted, I'd have a lot of land and I'd have fruit trees and horses and a stream or something with running water and just be able to, and not a lot of people around and just be able to go and get away from it all. And I looked at her and I said, oh, Kimberly, you just described my childhood. So we really did have kind of an idyllic place there in the river bottoms, even though we were the river rat kids.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for sharing your memories.
Yeah, let's do it again. This has been fun.
Yeah.